We're very, very lucky to have Dr. Code with us. He's actually from Canada. He has been working with the EMU oil and the EMU industry for a good number of years, and we really appreciate him taking his time out to be with us today. Thank you, Dr. Code.
Thank you. Make my order such a hassle to ship to Canada. Well, it's great to be here this afternoon, folks. Thanks again very much for the invitation. It was a delight to get that. I haven't been at one of these since Rochester, Minnesota. So what year is that, folks?
2000.
2000 even?
Around there.
Okay, somewhere in that range. I don't think when I was at that I even had the green book done as yet. Some of you have purchased that. That's the green book called Youth Renewed. And it was written literally to help market EMU oil. The fellow that sponsored it ran a lot of health food stores in Canada. He'd had huge success 10 years before with capsaicin. This guy had terrible heart disease. He got into capsaicin, wrote a book, and of course the guy sold a ton of capsaicin. But of course things changed over time. We printed 5,000 copies. We got about 40 left. When those are gone, they're gone. You know, they're out of print. And so it's been quite effective as a tool. And then the other book, which I've got out there, is sort of the story of the journey so far. So what I'm going to do today is give you a bit of a story in my journey, what got me into EMU oil and into EMUs per se, because that started at about 93 for me. It's interesting, the very first time I heard of EMUs, I was about 8 years old. My brother had a pen pal in Australia, and he got an EMU egg in a wooden tea box from his pen pal in near Garong Garong in New South Wales, for any of you that know Australia. I've since lost that brother, due to HIV/AIDS, but it's very near and dear to me. And then when I got my own health challenge, my background, you've got a bit in the book. I did some general practice for 4 years, and then I did a specialty, and then I did research on how anesthetics work on the brain, which is a bit interesting with EMU oil because you can determine the strength of anesthetics if you can see how well that product dissolves in olive oil. And EMU oil and olive oil are a lot alike. There's a comparison in both books about them, okay? So, because the brain, 2/3 fat. So if you need a new compliment for one of your good friends, say, you're a fathead. Because that's a good thing, all right? So then after that, I went on and taught at university and did stroke research. And again, I worked on how things work on the brain. It all starts to fit together. After about 4 years of that, like some of you, I was almost on medication for blood pressure. What am I now? 38, I guess. And I was looking at medication for cholesterol. So I'm very near and dear to my heart. I was the highest in my class with cholesterol in 1973 when I was in first year medical school. Okay, so that dates me a bit. So I've always had an interest with it. In 1975, I did one of the wiser things in this lifetime. I married my wife, who was a dietitian. And that's now 32 years ago, okay? But I've, studied the cholesterol issue for a long, long time. It was just getting big in the 70s, and then it got into the biggest money-making drug thing in the planet, the statins, which they put in the water if they could, and probably are going to now disappear, because they got more harm than they do good. But it'll take us a decade or so to admit that in the regular world. This is, I know, being taped, but there's a lot of places I would just assume it wasn't shown. I don't want to disappear at night. So moving on from there, so because of all those stress-related challenges, migraine headaches was another big one, I moved out to the West Coast, to the northwest, so to speak. I live in Vancouver Island, which is just across from Seattle, okay? We have the cool Mediterranean climate. You can grow olive trees there, all right? So I'm into olives a little bit. But after a couple years there, my wife and I bought an acreage. I'm a farm boy from just above Saskatchewan, just above Minot, North Dakota, okay? So not that far from here. Climate pretty similar to here. Grew up in a mixed farm, the 5th of 7 kids, right? So from that farming background, I'd never gone near an acreage because I knew it was a way bit of work. You needed to worry where the water came from. You need to worry where the sewer went to and all those little things. But we finally bought an acreage. We bought a lot of animals. We were a rescue place for a while for the local, rescue animal society. And then eventually we decided we'd get into emus. Then I could retire early, you know how that goes.
Right.
Anyway, we got into emus about 1993 in the fall, and we started very sensibly with 2 pair and 10 chicks, which grew up pretty rapidly. But then the guy who had sold them to us, he got an infection his second time with heart surgery, so he got an infection of his chest wall, right? So then he sold us another 186. So we were running and pairing, I'll call them arranged marriages, you know how it goes, and working on that. And then in 96, sort of when I was at the top of my game in some perspectives, because when I left teaching at the University of Saskatchewan, I left most research. About a year later, after all my stress markers came down, and a workaholic is always a recovering workaholic. And most of the folks in this room are movers and shakers. I know that, because you wouldn't be in this game if you weren't. Anyway, after moving out to Vancouver Island, I got really into chronic pain therapy. And it all starts to tie in. And then in 96, I was invited to go and speak at the World Congress of Anesthesiology in Australia, home of the EMU, as you know. About a month prior to that, they had a conference in Adelaide, the World EMU Conference, about the second one ever held in 96. Jeffrey Johns, who's dedicated to in the first book, did a lot of the early work on EMU oil, certainly from Canada. Pretty interesting kind of guy. We decided he was probably about 150 if we believe half the things he'd done in his life, including MI5 and the CIA and so on. But anyway, but a really brilliant organic chemist. So he taught me a lot, and it was his work that helped me be part of the EMU Oil Standards International Standards team, of course, set up by the AEA. This is now 96, 97, 98. Lee Smith was running it at that time, and when he stepped down, I chaired it for about a year, and then it's gone on to newer and other people since. So setting up the EMU Oil Standards team. But I went over to Australia, went to the World EMU Conference, learned that, and then I talked on how to treat pain without narcotics, or without opiates, right? So that was a whole host of things. But in that article back then was EMU oil. I thought, what a better way to get it to about 3,000 physicians at once? So I talked there that day at about half an hour, and in my printed article, it has about a page and a half on EMU oil. So it got reintroduced in Australia, which of course is home over it all started, so to speak, when the people, mostly from Europe, went there, and of course had been there a long time with the Australian Aborigine. So then in 96, after coming back from that, those 2 episodes, I started to get my own health challenge. I was getting more and more tired all the time. I was still cycling to and from work, but my foot was slipping off the bicycle pedal on the right side from time to time, and I'd crash and finally decided it was safer to drive. And so by the end of the summer, though, the fatigue was worse, and the weakness in the right side was worse, and I couldn't empty a syringe with my right side. I'd stand up a minute or two, we were sitting down because I didn't have any strength in my legs. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And then I got worse for another 13 months. So that's progressive MS. It's the wrong choice to have. You never get that choice, of course. And, a bit like fibromyalgia, we're behind on the, MS thing as guys. We only, a third of MS is guys and 2/3 is women. It's just a crossover variation of the illness. But the interesting thing that tied into EMU oil, because for the first few months after getting worse and worse and worse, telling my family I thought I was probably worth more alive than dead, or more dead than alive, but you couldn't work anymore, lose your profession, your friends disappear. That's a little interesting in the second book. It's not in the first one. Especially in the medical profession, because as physicians, we don't know how to treat each other if we're not well. In fact, we're running so hard and so fast that it takes 6 months to even wake up to the fact that you're running that fast and that hard. And you don't want to associate, I think, with other people that are ill because you're worried maybe it'll happen to me. All right? So people get their own respective challenge. But anyway, after about a year, I finally started to look around, what could I do? Because I realized there wasn't any choices in regular medicine for MS. We were just coming out with the injectables at that time. It wasn't recommended to me initially. I have a sister with MS. She was finally put on one of those injectables, had some benefits, said, you got to get on this pill. So I went to see, and I was lucky. I saw one of the experts. He was born here in Georgia, Don Patey, brilliant guy. And he said, no, Bill, you're doing too well without it. So I started to find other pieces. But the very first thing I found that helped my fatigue a little bit was taking a teaspoon of EMU oil twice a day. Okay? So that's equivalent to Well, 10 capsules, 1 teaspoon, because the capsules are either 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams, depending if they're horse pills or half-sized horse pills. You know how it goes. All right? But that finally got me hooked in thinking, remember my wife's a dietitian, maybe I could find a few pieces. Because if I could get 20% better with my energy by taking EMU oil capsules, if I could find a few other pieces to the puzzle so that I could get 20% here, 10% there, maybe 30% here, say vitamin D. I'm very big on vitamin D. And those sorts of issues, maybe I could get some of my health back. So that's been the journey. And that's why the first book, because I became a major speaker on EMU oil. The first time I was lucky enough to meet Dr. Dan Dean, we were in Montreal. There was a woman doing EMU Dundee, crafty name, especially for her French Canadian. Anyway, but she was doing a major promo and had Ernesto Hernandez, and I think Lee was there too, Lee Hopkins and Dan and I, because there was only a small number of people. At that time, I'd smashed my right leg pretty badly. I was trying out this bicycle, which you'll read about in the book. It went all the way across Canada with EMU oil on its chain. Never changed the chain once. It's 5,500 miles. Long way. Anyhow, so I tried the bike, smashed the ankle badly, got steel in it, and then 2 weeks later, I was talking with Dan Dean. And so we did that, but by the time I was ready to give my second talk, I think, my leg was like a football, you know. It looked infected. Dan was the only, other physician of the group. You're not supposed to treat yourself. So I learned that a long time ago. So anyway, went on antibiotics and those sorts of things. So I was, standing on one leg and looked pretty unwell. So I think he was happy to see I was doing reasonably well today. I never thought I'd come back this far. I looked awful. And I felt about a poor quality 90, was how I reckoned it. I'm 54 next month. I feel as good as I have since my 30s. So to get back into this health issue, because we're into a health issue. So I want to give you some ideas today that will help you in your own personal health journey, because I got to keep my EMU colleagues healthy. Why? Well, for the simple reason that it makes a difference to what you can do in the long haul, because I believe in EMU as well. We still raise them, although the majority are raised by a younger farmer, in co-relationship, and he's in Saskatchewan. But anyway, the key thing is about it, you can find different pieces. So whether it's developing product or giving talks, I've learned very much to walk which line with health food products. That's whether it's with the FDA in the United States, or it's Health Canada, or it's even over in Britain and in Europe, right? There's certain things you want to know, and certain things you want to keep out of your mouth, certainly out of your written word, and certainly out of your ads, okay? There's a few key words you just want to go there, because if you are, then you're practicing medicine. Now, I still have a license to practice. I've written a prescription for a few years. I'm now well enough, I'm going to start to work at the local hospice, the people dying of cancer society, because they aren't doing as well as they could, and there's other things that we can help them with. But I want you to think in terms of inflammation and pain, dryness, descriptive things, but I want you to get over using diagnoses. Because it's diagnoses get people really upset. And if there's a really important word I want you to quit using any more than in a conversation, which isn't being recorded, I want you to get over arthritis. Because it is dynamite. And there's a whole list of things that are written in pharmaceutical terms to help people with arthritis. You're going to get a short course in medical terminology, or EMU, which stands for Empowering Medical Understanding, but you're not going to leave here today as physicians. You don't want to be a physician anyway. They die an average age of 56, which would wipe out a few of us in this room already, and me pretty close, okay? So we don't want to talk about anti-aging with them anyway. Arth means joint. Okay? Itis means inflammation. Okay, you folks are going to help me out here, because I know, what's the number one or two thing that we know about EMU oil? It's anti-inflammatory. Okay, so I need your help here today. What are 4 things that inflammation does to the body? Think of me hitting my thumb with a hammer. What'll happen? It'll swell. Okay. Pain. Right on. Redness. I'm sorry? Stiffness. A little later on, we'll get the stiffness. But the other one is heat. Okay? So those are the 4 things of inflammation. All right? So that's arthritis. That raises a lot of hackles. I wrote an article into, sort of one of these health things for seniors. And then my colleague had put an ad about EMU oil on the same page. And then the person who was putting it together put a circle around all of it. Well, we got a really big, nasty letter from Health Canada. Those aren't good things to get. You want to, not stay in that territory. But you can talk about inflammation, swelling, redness, heat, and pain all day long. Okay? Dermatitis, same thing. Derma, that just means skin. You're back to itis. So the itises, I want you to use those terms and not the others. And that's why I didn't bring up eczema earlier, which is another name for dermatitis, which I would like to see EMU oil pretty much replace the cortisone creams. In many cases it will. People are really waking up to that fact. Tremendous to have a product called Transdermis, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, because that sort of covers all the bases. And now they got a place that they can go to get it because, you will, sure, some of you will have your own product and you'll promote those. But much better for me as a clinician, if I'm talking about pain, whether it's in Los Angeles or wherever I am, to have a product to say that's on the market, okay? Transdermis starts to educate the public, and he and his team will be working with that sort of principle, but it's pure EMU oil. Pure EMU oil has a number of advantages to it. How many folks here have made a cream for either skin or joint pain that's got some water in it? Yeah, okay. Lots of us have. It doesn't keep that great unless you put a ton of other things that people don't want to put in it, or they don't want to put on their skin, right? So, what causes things to grow? Well, purely prepared, pure EMU oil, it won't grow squat. It won't grow bacteria. It won't grow viruses. Why? Because viruses and bacteria need water, and they need protein. Now, you may or may not have protein in your mixture. You probably do. But you sure have it when you put it on the skin because there's protein there, all right? So now you've got the risk of infection, or if there's protein and water in the mixture, it's pretty easy for something to grow inside it. And you're a really unpopular camper, as you can imagine, if they take the lid off and it's got something green and fuzzy growing there. You got to throw it all out. It's not that much fun, but it's the water and the protein. So that's the beauty, the simplicity of the pure EMU oil, okay, for that perspective. So joint, doesn't matter what the joint is. The same thing happens with muscles, right? So I like the name Blue EMU, okay, very credible product. We had our other hiccups with the blue stuff. The blue stuff guy got into a big legal deal. He approached me as the EMU expert, wrote him a big brief. I think they either settled or whatever. Anyway, he never paid me for the brief. And the other guy doing the big brief was out of Oregon, who was doing this stuff on MSM, right? He was the world's expert on MSM. He's in Portland, Oregon. Anyhow, the key thing that you want to know about is what is inflammation? Because people will get it. They want to talk to you. The other thing that I've learned in my 12 years with EMU oil at least, well, closer to 14, I guess now, but anyway, is that just because you get one physician hooked on it doesn't mean you're going to be able to retire. The best thing that's working is word of mouth, because you folks are out there. You get your swear-by customers, right? They're the ones that matter, okay? Because they will tell their friend and so on. And most of us are most successful with the word of mouth principle, or, face on, whether it's at a fair or a health food show or maybe some sort of variation of a bazaar, because we're meeting the people. Because what matters is the relationship of trust you develop as you talk about things, and the sincerity within you. The other thing we went by slightly today, and it was mentioned in the videos yesterday, was agritourism. It's well established now, agritourism is one of the best places any farmer anywhere in the world, but certainly in Canada, the United States, can make some money, is a tour of the farm. They will buy product there when they're there. And they will pay a decent price for the product and won't even worry too much about the price because they're buying the experience. You're selling the experience. You've got to remember that because it's another very valuable tool. And I'm now very much into the importance of growing local, eating local food, having survival of the small farm. How many folks have here heard of Michael Pollan? He wrote 2 books, or more than that probably, The Botany of Desire and The Omnivore's Dilemma. Botany of Desire is a bit of a chew, but The Omnivore's Dilemma, well worth a read. 4 meals that he's eaten across the United States and where they came from, okay? But it'll shake you to your core. And the other one that's really good is by Jane Goodall. Remember the woman who did all the work on chimpanzees? She's written a fabulous book about where our food comes from and all the issues, Harvest of Hope. Both of those try to get us back on track because our health, just as the previous speaker, and she did a fabulous job, chronic illness is the bugbear of health, well, throughout the world, but especially here in Canada, United States. Our healthcare system in Canada is broken. So is yours. Michael Moore's book, or movie, Sicko, S-I-C-K-O, is just released, okay? And he's the guy who did Fahrenheit 9/11 and Columbine and so on. But he talks about, this is really amazing, because he talks about the problems within healthcare in the United States and how it's broken, but he points to Canada for the solution. Well, I live in Canada, and it's not much of a solution, okay? But the reality of the piece is people are back to natural products, and EMU oil is a classic one, especially because it can be used topically so well. Now, you can go the oral route, but it's more tricky. And, you know, we've had, if you send 2 barrels, that's 2 55-gallon drums, that costs you $8,000 to $12,000 to put it into capsules, because people like it simple, all right? If you're going to go the oil route, whether that's fish oil for the omega-3s, and I'm going to spend a few minutes on that because I think we should clear up that issue a little bit for you because it's really important. But if somebody doesn't like the flavor of the oil that they're taking, have them take 2 shot glasses. Does anybody here not know what a shot glass is? I had a great time. My wife and I were at a wedding a while ago in Saskatoon, and our kids had us over with their friends to the bar, and they said, we're going to show you how to drink shooters. It's always so neat when the young kids teach the old dog who probably knew the tricks already. So anyway, you take your 2 shot glasses, you put your favorite juice in them, and my favorite is grapefruit juice, okay, but you can use orange juice, whatever. So you put an ounce in each of those, roughly an ounce in each of those, and then you put your fish oil. I take 2 teaspoons a day, all right, of a good quality fish oil, and it's way cheaper if it's in a liquid, or you could put EMU oil on, and as most of you know, you either need to have the separated out winterized straight liquid oil, or you need to have it slightly warm, because otherwise it's got, firmness into it. All right, we'll talk about that in a sec. And then so you take the one with the oil down, you shoot it down, you don't have it touch your lips, and then you chase it with the other glass of juice. And it works incredibly well. And you've saved a fortune, and now you don't have the extra issues, because if you want to create issues in your life, keep following down the path of promoting mostly the thing you put in your mouth, because it's getting more and more stringent all the time, and it's only going to get a little more challenging and not less challenging. Just a word of advice where you want to focus and where you want to have your grief. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about oils. We got to it a bit earlier, but the short story is a triglyceride, tri means 3, is just a backbone or chain to hook fatty acids on, and that's the minimum size, is those 3 pieces in the skeleton deal, right? So whether it's got 4 in it, butyric acid, which means 4, okay, butter, or it's got 22 or 26. They all go along, and they're all hooked onto the triglyceride chain. Active components in EMU oil. How many folks have read the 1996 patent on EMU oil by the 4 Australian guys, Gosh and others? Okay? Yeah. Well, it's not ripping reading, is it? But if you can't sleep,
You have to, yeah.
you will. But in that, if you read it carefully, and I was reading it carefully at that point, and my mind was working better again now, but I didn't think it ever would, because cognitive problem is one of the deals with MS, sadly but truly, just as pain is too, neuropathic pain. Anyway, it talks in there, they made an oil completely equivalent to EMU oil. All the fatty acids were identical. But it didn't work. It didn't have the anti-inflammatory properties. So they summarize in there saying, it must be something in the yellow pigments of EMU oil which has that magic factor of anti-inflammatory. Now, we're trying to chase that down. I live in Vancouver Island, just across from Vancouver, and I'm the EMU ostrich guy. It's the closest I've been to ostriches. I'm the EMU ostrich guy for British Columbia. That's about 4 million people, okay, just so you know the size. All right, for the Specialty Bird Research Committee. Because in 2004, you saw those things on avian influenza today. That was when the outbreak was in the lower mainland, in around Vancouver, Abbotsford, because there's a large amount of chickens grown there and other birds. We knew roughly then because they slaughtered 19 million at that time. And the guys with emus, they didn't get much compensation. They would phone me and try to get a value and a number. And that's why she gave you a good tip today. Keep good records. Because if they're just worked at what they're parking them at the local auction mart this week, you're not going to get much compensation, even though they mean a lot more to you as breeders and so on. But anyway, the fallout from that was the poultry specialists for British Columbia, or for our state or province, convinced them to put $1.2 million into a research committee for specialty birds. Well, that's ducks, geese, squab or pigeons, quail, emus, ostrich. That's pretty well it, okay? So that 1.2 million, we're in the third year of it now, and we're spending, they had it given to the University of British Columbia to be dealt with by the Avian or Bird Research Center. So that is the first time, in my awareness, that we've had that significant amount of money to start to put into a research fund. And it could be worked on projects that the committee approved, so much spent per year, and then we could tease out topics and projects. So one of the projects is trying to figure out what are those yellow pigments. That's a fairly expensive project. I don't know about in this country, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. Most research funding, except of course what you guys are putting together, is always tied to another grant. At best you can get 50-cent dollars. Well, it's always tricky getting the first 50 cents, isn't it? If it's a decent amount of money. But this didn't have that tied to it. Okay, so we're very fortunate, and it's already attracting attention around the world. We had the specialty bird expert, including emus from Australia, from Perth. He was over to visit us because there's not much happening in the specialty bird research industry. So anyway, we're trying to tease out what those yellow pigments are by any number of choices. Whether we find it is another question. Whatever we find will be published. I've got a long research track record. A physician or a research scientist will not believe it. I don't care how good the story is. Well, I mean, it helps them if they see the pictures like Dan showed us earlier and so on, but they won't believe it until it's printed in a peer-reviewed journal. So this will appear there. In fact, some of the other farmers on the committee, I'm a irony because I'm a farmer as well as the other background I've had, they said, but that should just be for us. That should give us a jump on everything else. And I said, you can't do that because the world doesn't believe you. All right? I mean, I've seen some decent articles put together, not only funded by drug companies, but by other companies as well. But if you put in all the money and you publish it, they're still prone not to believe it. It has to be done by a third party. And that's where universities come into it. And that's why it's great to have folks like, Blue Emu recognizing that R&D needs research, which must be published research. Because it's better for all of us. No question about it, as we learn more about it. So that's the one concept. The other is, what could we optimally feed emus? This gentleman talked here about, feeding emus. And then what would be the better genetic lines for fat or for meat sort of deal? What would be a good way to solve the nematode? We didn't get into it this morning. That's the little tiny worm that's carried in raccoon scat or poops, which gets into the emu, gives them falling down. That was confirmed and proven from, unfortunately, a lot of birds that we sent over to the research center in British Columbia. And Dr. Vicky Bose, the avian pathologist, who's now the world expert on the nematode, because it's a real hassle if your bird gets sick, falls down, and we don't know what to do with it. We don't. We know what causes it. All right, so those are some of the projects that were started on and working on. The other ones that are already out that were done in Canada, there's a Dr. Politis, and all of these ones, including these two out of Canada, are listed in the back here of the Green Book, as well as, Griswold from his time at the American Burn Association. So if you go to about page 244, if you happen to have a copy with you, it starts to list those. And also a thank you to Dan Dean, because the pictures that are in here are virtually all from him as well, when we printed this. So when Dr. Politis did his study was on wound healing by emu oil, okay? And he compared it with puricin, which is an antibiotic, used a lot in veterinary practice, polysporin, and cortisone, which most of you know, hydrocortisone, okay? And he's a PhD veterinarian and another researcher there in Saskatoon, Canada. So they did that paper, and it was published, in a good journal. It was in Plastic Surgery, one of the plastic surgery journals. So that was documented, and that's a while ago. But what he showed, of course, not surprising to you and I mean, I'm talking to the converted already, I realize. But that if you put on the cortisone, it slowed the speed of healing by half. So it took twice as long to heal. We've known that. When I used to be working with a young junior intern, and they were super slow finishing up the skin incision and all. Anesthesiologist always in the operating room. It's just the way it is. I did my American boards as well as my Canadian, because I wasn't sure where I was going to live. Anyway, I'd say it's no problem. We gave them an injection of steroids, and they're going to be a lot longer healed up. That's not true. We didn't do that. But they'd get the message. Okay, when they used the polysporin, that's, sped the healing up a little bit over just the control, all right? But emu oil doubled the rate of wound healing, twice as quick. Okay, so quite a profound difference, and that was in a controlled incision in the back of rats, okay? So that was one of the early studies, and that was done in Canada. Another one was done more in the eczema model, and this was done in guinea pigs. They used the guinea pig ears, because they got pretty big ears, sort of like mine. Except it's not good to have big ears if you're fixing fence in an emu pen, because they'll kind of ticklish, to put it mildly. We don't have any of those emus with big teeth like the one this morning, but they do tingle a bit. Anyway, so that was done by the College of Veterinary Medicine out on the West Coast, out in Prince Edward Island. And they studied crouton oil, which is an irritant-type oil to put on the skin, and they compared it with corn oil as their baseline oil versus emu oil. And of course, as you would guess, emu oil worked much better. And that was put into a Journal of American Veterinary Medicine. Okay, so another peer-reviewed journal. Because you need to know the peer-reviewed journals much more so than you just need to have them listed in a story-type format. I mean, EMU today and tomorrow have done tremendous work. They've been a stalwart, a huge assist to our industry. But, being in there is not published in a peer-reviewed journal, unfortunately. Okay, it just isn't. So those are the two Canadian studies that are in print currently. So just to bring you up to date, the other ones are the ones that are in process of happening. We would like to tease those out, and there's others we would like to do. If I was given an option to what to study for emu oil pills, I wouldn't touch cholesterol, personally. Because, I read the study out of New England. It was a pretty well done study. It's in a big journal. You can get it too. You can print it off the internet, $35. I think the books are expensive. $35 for the single journal. It's even harder to read than the patent was. Anyway, it didn't work quite as well as the olive oil did. Now, emu oil if you look at the chart in one of the books, but it's nearly as high in monounsaturated fatty acids, or oleic acid, O-L-E-I-C. That's about 55–60% of EMU oil, roughly. Some of you will have the chart in front of me and you can yell out the number. And fine, I'll use that number. Olive oil itself is 70–80% monounsaturated fatty acid, or oleic acid. Where do you think oleic acid came from? It's almost the word olive. That's where it came from, O-L-E-I-C. Because we know that the omega-9s, monounsaturated fatty acids, meaning that they've got one double bond in them, are ones that are very, very good for our health. Hence the concept of the Mediterranean diet for heart disease. Because lo and behold, these guys in Crete, and Sicily, and parts of Italy, they just weren't having the heart attacks they should have been having because they were eating a huge amount of fat. But they were eating healthy fat. And that's why when I write the chapter on fat, I talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. Right? Now, we alluded a little bit those this morning, but we should spend a minute now on fats in that regard. Oleic acid, monounsaturated fatty acid, is known to penetrate the skin slightly. Okay? Nowhere near to the degree that EMU oil does. And that is another great place that we will have ongoing advantage. And, products like the Blue EMU do it, and your pain cream does it already too. Because not only does the EMU oil penetrate and do its own anti-inflammatory ability on the pain. Remember the word we're not going to use? What's the word we're not going to use? Right on. Good work. Yeah, he's already forgotten. Okay, so it penetrates through and it carries things with it. It's Paul Binford. I haven't seen it published, but if someone's got it published, get it to me, because we need to have it, and we need to share these ideas, because they're published already in the literature. Give me a break, okay? But anyway, my understanding from Paul was that EMU oil will take vitamin E, which is a fair-sized molecule. It's not a little tiny thing, vitamin E. And it'll carry it through the skin, much better than corn oil. And it'll raise the blood concentration of vitamin E. Well, that helps reassure us when we make our suggestion that our pain cream is somehow getting through the skin. It's taking what we put in with it. Now, after the earlier talk on fibromyalgia, that maybe we shouldn't have wintergreen and we shouldn't have mint and we shouldn't have menthol in it, or it's going to be a little tricky using it for that. So some of those folks are going to end up using straight EMU oil because they don't want to have the downside of those other things. But it carries it in. In fact, it carries it in to the degree that years ago I put one together with wintergreen in it, which is the natural name for salicylic acid, okay, methyl salicylate. And that was in an oil, okay. But I know that it carries it through. And those people, if they're on a blood thinner, like warfarin, rat poison, which lots of people are on, tragically. Warfarin stands for Wisconsin Agricultural Research Foundation. Little things you learn in pharmacology as you go along, right? So anybody from Wisconsin today? There you go. So you guys did that research in the 50s, and we're still swallowing it. Anyway, but of course, if you take an aspirin-type drug with that, you're at some risk of bleeding excessively, because they work in two different pathways on the blood clotting system. So those are just provisos. So you can't have it for free. If it carries stuff through the skin, then it may have an interaction component down the road. So just remember that. Because you can't say, well, no, I'm using it topically. No. You said it was going to carry it through. So now you had better fess up to the possibility it could have an interaction down the pipe. Well, yeah, it probably is. It may have some other issues. Okay, so let's get into a little bit about fatty acids. There's the omega-6, the omega-3, and the omega-9. This is a fairly shortened version, but I think you should know this because I don't want you to leave here today as healthcare practitioners, but I wouldn't mind you leaving here today as a health coach, especially for people with dry skin, irritated, red, inflamed, painful skin, right? You're not treating eczema, okay? Get over this treatment stuff. Get over cure. Gosh, the guys in medicine, we got over cure a long time ago because we don't cure anything. I mean, if in doubt, you can take it out, but that's about it. We don't cure many problems, okay? Mostly we buy time. The number one rule I want you to remember is the body heals itself. And when you forget that, go back to rule number 1. Because if you can provide the body more building blocks, which will help you, hence all the nutrition tips in the Winning the Pain Game book, it will do a better job of healing itself, small wonder, rather than just pushing away, treating the number, lowering the cholesterol, making the blood thinner. Anyway, big cost from those. Vitamin K is what's poisoned with warfarin. So, needless to say, it's got a lot of other issues for us long term. Vitamin K is important not just in blood clotting, it's important in osteoporosis and lots of other things. So we're going to pay the price for that, and we're already seeing it. People that have been on warfarin for years, they're seeming to have an increased risk of things like leukemia and so on. Because you can't mess with one corner of nutrition for the body and not pay a price. It just never works that way. So omega-3, omega-6. If you measured us in this room, or people all across the United States, and the blood concentrations were measured, we would have a ratio of about 16 or 20 to 1. 20 to 1 is easy to remember, okay? And that's what we measure at. So you can measure those, and that's where we come out. Where do you think we are naturally, say 5,000, 10,000 years ago? Even 100 years is a big difference, because we've changed our diet huge in the last 100 years. Well, 1 to 1, or maybe 2. That's normal. So, we've got some things, we'll write those down in the next page. But at the bottom of the omega-3 pathway is what I call anti-inflammatories. Can you still catch this on the bottom? Anti-inflammatories, okay? Now, so that's why people, can you see that okay? Jim? Not quite? I'll write it up again. I'll write it on the next page. I got lots of pages here. And I'm the last speaker, so we might as well use them up. Anyhow, omega-3, omega-6. The short story is the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. And that's why fish oils are touted so much these days, and I'm huge on flax too. But anyway, the anti-inflammatories, because it's a balancing act between about 4 inflammation pathways in the body, and the omega-3s help against about 3 of them. Huge help. Now, what happens if you get an excess on the omega-6 side? Just take a wild guess. You get more inflammation. God, you guys got it already. So as we take our 20 to 1 or 16 to 1 diet of omega-6s, you get huge inflammation. So you get more, I'm going to slip into laziness here, asthma, menstrual cramps, arthritis, muscle cramps, aches and pains, probably things like fibromyalgia, because you get more of these. So when Andrew Weil, and that's why I mentioned in there, because I'm taking his course. He's got a 2-year course in integrative medicine, open to nurse practitioners and physicians. He's been doing it about 6 years now. I'm in the class that finishes in December 2008, so I'm about a quarter done already. We spend a week in boot camp together. There's 80 in my class. About 5 of those are nurse practitioners. There's 8 oncologists. There's 8 or 9 pediatricians, heart surgeon, 3 or 4 cardiologists, a real spectrum of people, right? From all across Canada. There's 3 from Canada, not many. And United States mostly, but Puerto Rico and Middle East and so on. But almost all from the United States, from all across the United States. And who do you suppose might be registered in this class? Do you think they might be slightly more open-minded physicians than the regular rank and file? Well, they're looking for other answers from a more integrated approach. What integrative medicine is, it takes the best of traditional medicine, Eastern medicine or Chinese medicine, complementary alternative medicine, okay? And it works very much on the principle used by Hippocrates, number 1, do no harm. Because it would take a pretty naive individual to say, well, that drug probably can't do you any harm. Because some of them do, most of them do. And if you start adding them together, you get into a whole new kettle a fish or can of worms. So when Andrew Weil talks about the anti-inflammatory diet, he talks about cleaning out your fridge and your cupboard and taking out your corn oil. This is in the second book. And taking out your soybean oil and taking out your safflower oil and taking out your grapeseed oil, because those are almost all pure omega-6. And as I said earlier, they became really popular because they kept on the shelf forever. So if you bring these down, you need to work less hard at bringing these up. So that's the important bit. And just to finish that, in fact, the flax people a few years ago developed a product called linola. And they wanted to make a margarine out of flax. Seemed to be big bucks in margarine. Everybody was making big bucks on margarine. You know, it was probably one of the nastiest things we fed ourselves over the years. Now, before I digress there, before I beat up saturated fats, and they're not as nasty as have been made to think they are. 6 times as bad as saturated fats are, 6 times as bad are trans fats. Okay? Trans fats comes under lots of hidden names. Modified vegetable oil. Now, wouldn't have thought that, but it is. That's another way of saying trans fat. Hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated, all those are trans fats. Those are really poison for the body. We're not used to them. They didn't happen in nature, hardly at all. A little bit in a cow's gut, rumen. That's it, tiny amounts. Okay, so omega-6, omega-3s. This is alpha-linolenic acid. Charts in the books, both books. And this is linoleic acid. All right, and then this one goes to GLA. Anybody with MS is big on GLA. As soon as they hear you got MS, somebody will phone you up and say, Bill, you got to get on that evening primrose oil because it's really high in GLA, gamma-linolenic acid, right? The tricky part is it then goes to arachidonic acid. And this is worth mentioning to this group, arachidonic. Not to be confused with peanut oil, okay? That's got a different name. That's in the book. And what does that then become? That then becomes the nasty prostaglandins which cause inflammation. And that's one reason red meat's been beaten up so badly, because red meat has a fair bit of arachidonic acid. But I would suggest to you that just a tiny portion in our diet of arachidonic acid that's coming from red meat is big time overshadowed by the omega-6 oil. Okay? So put that, and because I haven't seen one yet, I haven't seen a white meat emu. I'll let you know a little secret. Well, I live on the West Coast, I already told you that. Out there's a lot of purists that say, oh, I don't eat any red meat, or much red meat. What do you eat? I eat chicken. Chicken, that's an interesting one, chicken. How long have we domesticated chicken? 100 years, little less, okay? They were back where we were, they came out of the jungle fowl, right? And a chicken. When they were flying, their breast meat was less of it, and it was red. What makes a mussel red? It gets used. It gets used, it has blood supply to it, and that's exactly how it works. A chicken, if it walks around at all, it gets dark meat. So, white meat, breast, never been used, okay? And you and I know there's no keel on an emu, but you can't have that emu walking around and not have red meat. So let's find a reason to protect, which was false in the first place, on red meat, arachidonic acid. There's a lot more in our others, and it's a lot more in our other things in our food chain that are pro-inflammatory. You don't want to go there. Pro-inflammatory means excess inflammation. Okay? So trans fats are bad news. Too much omega-6 is bad news. Probably not a good idea to do a lot of MSG, although they hide it under 101 names. Okay? And even things like aspartame or any of the pops now with the high fructose corn. There's probably a few corn growers in there, so I'm not going to go there much. Okay, arachidonic acid, but you want to know that. And then you want to know that EPA and DHA, these are the biggest deal around today, because these matter for heart health and they matter for brain health. How many folks here are going to live to be 100? Okay. How many more would like to live to 100 if they could have a good brain when they get there? Yeah, there's more people. Isn't that interesting? Because I don't want to live 20 years not knowing who I am. I had an uncle, he lived 11, didn't have a sniff, okay? He was mostly pretty good natured about it the last month or so.
How does the volume of DHA and EMU oil compare to fish oil
Okay, there's almost none, okay?
and EMU oil?
Yeah. Most EPA and DHA, the fish don't make it either. An emu is a bird. Here's a good trick. I learned this somewhere along the way. Nobody ever tells you this stuff. Whatever fat you feed to an emu, that's what it makes. That's what it stores. So if you want to predict what it stores, think about what it eats. Now, there's an exception on that. If they were major grazers, I don't know about you folks, but if I could get them to eat a third grazing, I'd be really happy. Anybody here tried it? To a great degree? How much will they graze? A third, roughly. Yeah, so that's good. Okay. And it's superb because when they're eating that green stuff, I don't care what it is, it might be alfalfa or a whole host of things, okay? And that's great. But we need to do more of that. Why? They can't get enough on the West Coast, certainly in Vancouver now, they can't get enough grass fat and beef. Why? Because it's really high in omega-3s. Now, there's not much oil in greens, right? But almost all the oil that's in greens is omega-3. So I like meat because it does a whole storage of all the healthy good things that animal ate. And I don't have to eat quite as many good things because I can help myself out by eating some meat. I like the taste of it too. All right? So that's a good one to put with you and take in because you'll get decent omega-3s. Now an ostrich, and I've never raised ostriches, and I'm not about to start, and they don't work in Canada anyway, okay? Because it's either too wet or too cold. All right? So ostriches, you got parts of the U.S. you could get away with ostriches. All right? Yesterday you could get away with an ostrich. I don't know about the winter time here, but yesterday was fine. But anyway, an ostrich does more grazing because it does more hindgut fermentation, much like a horse, a little bit like a ruminant. Okay? You know the four stomachs of the cow and sheep. But we're not going to get there with emus. But if we can do some pasture, it will increase the omega-3 in there. So if you want to go that route. Or you can feed them what you want to feed them. Okay, but you can determine what's in it. Fish mostly don't make those omega-3s. They're much like, is this surprising? The reptiles and the birds and the fish, all pretty similar, pretty close cousins. Not that far apart. They get theirs from algae. All right? And other things that they eat. And that's where it goes up the food chain. So, one principle once you take it away, eat more greens. If you missed that, eat more greens. Okay? And then eat things that have eaten more greens. Fruits and vegetables, secret to health. Big ones. Okay. So, we've beaten up a few things there. People want to ask any questions on that?
5 minutes.
And then I'm done.
Well, and then you just question and answer, but they need to start moving from the other side, so.
There you go. So quick, short questions. Yes, sir.
If emu oil is, what, usually 16% omega-6 and about 1% omega-3,
Yeah.
from what you're saying, why is it anti-inflammatory?
It's got nothing to do with the fatty acids. That's what I wanted you to take away. It's the yellow pigment in emu oil that is probably the anti-inflammatory. That was fairly decent research done by the scientists, and it was published. It was published in that patent. You got access to any patent. There's about 9, 10 patents on emu oil now. Okay? Don't think that there isn't any. There's quite a few. There's one on lidocaine and freezing and the whole bit. But, you know, they teased out the concept, and it's not the fatty acid makeup that makes emu oil special. So get over that part. The only reason you would want to increase the omega-3s that would make it healthier if you're going to try and take more of it orally. But it's the wrong place to put your cash flow and impetus. You want to work on replace the liposomes, take stuff through the skin, do its own good stuff on the skin. I'd like to replace hydrocortisone cream with it.
If we fed them a whole bunch of corn or something, then we could make our fat.
You can screw it up bad enough. If you feed them bad enough, you feed them a hog ration, and they showed this in one of the Australian studies, some emu oil won't work. So don't push the envelope too far away from what would be sort of natural. Yeah, good question though.
What about everybody wants clear oil?
Yeah, where does that come from?
Yeah.
Well, they taught us that in the 50s because they had cottonseed oil and they discovered cottonseed oil. They could make an oil out of it. This was good because it was just a waste product from cotton fields. So they made an oil, and lo and behold, it's just almost like EMU oil. You let it sit at a coolish temperature, 55 Fahrenheit, 60 Fahrenheit. Top third will be oil. Bottom 2/3 will be thick stuff. Almost the same makeup, but the bottom 2/3 became Crisco. Cute, good idea. Top third became salad oil. And then they taught us, with many years of promotion and advertising, we wanted a clear, odorless, slightly gold or yellow or clear oil. So that's what we want. Well, it'll take a while to convince it otherwise. Now, you can winterize, that's the term they use. That's what Paul does with his, and everybody else does too if they want to. You take the stuff off the clear, it mostly stays clear. You get it cold enough, it also settles out. Just like olive oil. When people say, Dr. Code, it's got some clear stuff on top and the other's milky. And I say, that's good. It's natural. What's your olive oil do? Well, it does the same thing. And it does. Just slightly different temperatures. But that's what oils do. So that's a mindset thing. There's no particular advantage to it. Yes?
Are you telling me then that the carotene that's in the yellow of the feed is actually where
It may be carotenoids. We sent some fats down to be analyzed, I don't know, it was South or North Carolina. Because that was part of the study. It's moderately expensive to do. There's 600 carotenoids. There's not one or two. Except they were stumped down there. They never worked with an oil before. So now we're going to people who've done research on oils to try to get the carotenoids teased out, to see, is there one that we can find? Carotenoids, some are inflammatory, most are anti-inflammatory. Carotenoids are a whole host of antioxidants, proanthine, you know, the whole list goes on. Yeah, but it may be in that group. But if we just feed them straight corn, we don't seem to improve that. So that's a particular carotene, the one that we're most used to. I mean, they dial in how yellow do you want your eggs, and they put it in the feed.
So just another quick one. The Australians have a grading system for the anti-inflammatory from 1 to 100. Did you know about that?
Well, I know about it, but it's fairly expensive to do, but it's another research project we want to initiate in Canada, and I want it to happen here too, because for any good research project to get good acceptance, you need to have it done in 2 different centers, okay? But we do badly need a bioactivity of EMU oil as far as anti-inflammatory. If we could consistently show that. It's not an easy thing to tease out and show, okay? And they don't want you to experiment on animals. So, you know, it's going to take some good creativity to do that decision-making process. But we need one. We do need one badly. Yes, Jim?
More of a personal question than a scientific one, and you may have answered it and I might have missed it, but why do you take your fish oil in juice instead of in a capsule?
Because I'm cheap.
Because what?
I like it inexpensive. It costs about 1/3 as much in liquid as it does in a capsule. And I would be needing 10 horse-sized pills a day for what I'm doing.
And it was grapefruit juice?
Yeah.
That causes baldness.
But I'm taking EMU oil, and if I was going to research anything for oral ingestion of EMU oil, it would be thickening of hair. Because if you look at that green book in front of you, my hair was a further inch back.
I just wondered. I didn't know why you did it that way.
And here's another, you know, off the cuff, grapefruit juice. Most drugs you can't take it with. Now, why is that? Well, because it actually slows down the drug's breakdown, increases the drug's performance. Now, if being a cheap guy like I am, I could just take less drug. As long as I took consistent amounts of grapefruit juice, and I'd save a lot of money and a lot of side effects. But that would be a poor choice if I was selling the drug. Good. I think we should probably wrap it there.